phenomenon. And Galileo, judged by the church, it's always the previous authorities that are the judges of the next era. You go through the trial, you go through the death, the execution, it's getting more civilized with Galileo. You have a house arrest, but behind him, of course, is Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake just 3 decades earlier, so it wasn't too civilized at that point still. And then Nietzsche, who's in some sense judgment, self-judgment and crucifixion was interior, psychological, so appropriate for the postmodern era that he is the prophet of. So let's now do a little simple diagram to try to give greater clarity to the dynamic that took place in terms of our worldview through this evolution. We could first make a very simple distinction between the modern worldview, Cartesian, and that's not too bad. Not being trained as a Waldorf teacher. If we could make a simple comparison between the primal worldview, the indigenous traditional cultures, the shamanic cultures, you could say let me just point out something that I'm sure most of you are aware of. I started with the Greeks and the Jews. But of course, both of them, they're coming out of behind them, of course, is ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, the larger, and with influences from India coming ambiguous ways throughout the early stages here. But behind all of this is a kind of animistic, shamanic rhizome, you know, the word that Jung uses for the soil out of which these later flowerings came. And that animistic, shamanic sensibility that experienced spirits in the forest and psychic and spiritual presences in the movement of the wind and the water and a kinship between the souls of human beings and the souls of animals, and a sense of there being gods and goddesses in the heavens, and the cycles of the sun and the moon are spiritually and humanly consequential. All of this represents a kind of informing a background, a matrix, out of which the West emerges. And that emergence, you could say, the crucial period is the axial era, to use Karl Jasper's term, and particularly the 6th century BC or BCE, where you have, in just a very short time, basically about a third of a century, you've got Buddha, you've got Lao Tzu in the beginning of Taoism, you've got the beginning of Confucius, the beginning of Confucianism, you've got the peak of the Delphic oracle, the Orphic religion is reaching, it comes into a new development at that point. You've got the birth of Greek philosophy with Pythagoras and Thales. You've got Sappho and this beautiful emergence of lyrical, individual lyrical poetry. You've got Many scholars believe that this is also the same period that Zoroaster, the beginning of Zoroastrianism, takes place, and the beginning of, in India, not only of Buddhism, but also of, I'm still suffering the effects of my Swiss journey here of jet lag.
Jainism and Mahavira?
Yeah, thank you, Mahavira and the birth of Jainism. So all these are happening in a short period, and this is really the birth of the, or the emergence of a new sense of deity and their whole religious consciousness in the Hebrew prophets as well. This is the great Hebrew prophets, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, 2nd Isaiah, all right at the time of the Babylonian captivity. And there's a line that goes straight from those prophetic awakenings to the nature of God and God's relationship to human beings in history. A straight line that goes from them to Martin Luther King. I mean, it's a very, that part of the axial period sets in motion a new worldview, out of which the West takes a particular inflection. And so let's first show how, with a little diagram here. This will be the primal animistic worldview of participation mystique, where the self is embedded in the world in a relatively undifferentiated way, and experiences itself. The inner reality of the human self is continuous with the inner reality of the world. And these lines represent where soul and spirit and conscious intelligence and purpose and meaning reside, namely through the whole world in which the human self is meaningfully embedded. By contrast, in the modern worldview, if we think of it, let's say, as the Cartesian cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, and that tremendous sense of radiant self awareness in a world that is seen as lacking. First of all, there's a sharp boundary between subject and object, and what is most relevant to human consciousness, emotional, moral, aesthetic, spiritual values and aspirations and so forth, that whole experiential dimension is seen as being exclusively located inside the human being, a property of the human being, while the world is seen as lacking those qualities. It's a world of objects. It's a world of that is subject to rational understanding and exploitation by the autonomous human rational self. Okay, so you've got from here to here, over thousands of years, you've got this tremendous forging of an individual self, constellating it out of the larger matrix of the anima mundi, of the soul of the world. And it also is a relocation of all meaning and purpose in the whole cosmos and putting it inside the human self, which from some perspectives could be seen as a act of cosmic hubris, to, like a giant vacuum cleaner, take all the meaning and purpose in all of the universe and put it in here. It's no wonder that in the late 19th century, depth psychology had to emerge. Nietzsche had to go down into his depths. Freud and Jung had to start paying attention to what had been suppressed inside the unconscious of the human being, because it was such a an appropriation and repression of the whole. The unconscious is essentially constellated by the emergence of the conscious in separated, objectifying human subject of the Cartesian self. Cartesian consciousness, in some sense, begins the constellating of the unconscious. I love that sentence of Jung's where he says, because the stars have fallen from the sky, we have psychology. We have to have psychology. That full quote I ran across the other day. Yeah. Since the stars have fallen from heaven and our highest symbols have paled, a secret life holds sway in the unconscious. That is why we have a psychology today and why we speak of the unconscious. All this would be quite superfluous in an age or culture that possessed symbols. Boy, that's classic Jung. He just loves sentences like that. All right. Now, one of the things that I just, by bringing in that axial period and bringing in the roots of the modern self in Greece and Israel, what I want to emphasize is that there's an absolutely crucial midpoint between here and here. And that's the emergence of the historical religious sensibility that took the form of Judaism and then Christianity in the West, Islam as a powerful influence on the borders of Europe, and even inside played a huge role in the making possible the High Middle Ages. And in Greece, it takes the form in many ways of Platonism, the crucial philosophical epiphany of the ancient Greek period, because that experience basically in all these cases is of a transcendent locus of meaning and purpose that is the ultimate locus of all meaning and purpose in the universe. In Judaism and Christianity, it's God who creates the world and is therefore superior to the world. That he creates virtue. These are virtually always masculine symbolizations of the divine, and they're connected to masculine symbolizations of the human being, God and man, anthropos, homo, and so forth. And in Platonism, it takes the form of the transcendent ideas and the archetypal principles, the divine light that's outside the cave of human experience.